Welcome back to The New World Next Week. I'm James Corbett of CorbettReport.com.
And I'm James Evan Pilato of MediaMonarchy.com. James, you and I were just talking off mic for a moment about our first story on this episode 210 of The New World Next Week. You had not heard of this story. It's something that's been going on and building right here in my backyard, and now it's become part of the record books. Oregon's GMO labeling campaign breaks the spending record. This comes via the local Portland Tribune. Spending for and against a ballot measure that requires labeling of food containing genetically modified organisms has set an Oregon record. As of last Friday, total contributions to the principal campaign committees for and against Measure 92 were almost $23 million, and the spending is at $18.8 million. The previous record setter, James, was a big tobacco tax battle back in 2007. And interestingly enough, I didn't know this, I had not moved here by then. Oregon voters rejected a similar GMO labeling measure in 2002, which I think lets you know that we were kind of ground zero and ahead of the curve on this in a lot of ways. Voters rejected similar measures in California in 2012 and Washington in 2013, but only after a spending of $46 and $22 million, respectively, the latter a record for Washington state. So opponents of 92 here in Oregon, James, have collected $16.3 million and spent $12.5, meaning they've still got millions in their barrels for the last week to go. So the list of donors to the no side is the usual batch, James, of eugenics-obsessed multinational corporations run by multi-generational serial killers with a 100-plus year history of trying to kill us, like DuPont, who gave $4.5 million, Monsanto at $4 million, Pepsi at $1.4 million, Coca-Cola, not to be outdone, at $1.1 million, and Kraft at $870,000. Those are the big boys. On the other side, Measure 92 supporters have collected $6.6 million and spent $6.3 million, leaving only $300K in the last week. California-based Doc Bronner's Magic Soaps and the Center for Food Safety Action Fund in Washington, D.C. have each given more than $1 million. Who would you trust, James? Pepsi or soap hippies? So with less than a week to go, James, the polling doesn't actually look good, and some of the polls actually have the GMO labeling losing by 6 points. So we'll follow that, and in addition to all the links we always give you every week for you to go continue to do more research for yourself, just the ballotpedia.org entry on the Measure 92, and it gets into all the ups and downs and the who's and the whats. An interesting note, James, also, no media really picked up on it, and we've got some exclusive bit of audio from Media Monarchy, and thanks to my legendary girlfriend, Cassie Cohn, who went out to a Yes on 92 rally last week in Portland, where Dennis and Elizabeth Kucinich both spoke out. And, James, we're also voting on whether or not to legalize weed. So there you go.
I thought Oregon had already done that, but I guess that's some of the other hippie states out there. Awesome. Well, there's so many things to say about this story. I mean, we could talk about it's not who votes that counts, it's who counts the votes. We could talk about as you say, I'm new to this initiative. I don't know what's in it, so I haven't had a chance to look at it. But I do recall when they did a similar initiative in California a couple of years ago, there was some interesting wording, some of the fine print in there that basically allowed large amounts of GMO as traces that would not be counted as GMO, even if the labeling laws went through. So there's kind of loopholes that I don't know if it's in this legislation, but it's certainly worth checking into. There's a lot of things to comment on, but I'm glad this story takes the tack of tallying up, the $29 million, $23 million or whatever that's been spent on this so far. Because, again, this comes down to the fact that does anyone other than the multi-million dollar multinational corporations really think that this is the best way to go about solving this issue? I don't think so. I mean, at best, even if this passed and even if it didn't contain all of those loopholes, the best we could hope for is that there would eventually in some form be some sort of labeling so people who are informed on these issues can make informed decisions for themselves. That's a good outcome and the best that we can hope for, but I don't think that's the best we should be aiming for. And again, I think if we put our faith and our time and our effort and our money into a big campaign like this, lobbying the government, big mama government, please take care of us, again, I think it's misplaced energies to a large extent. I think imagine if you took the $23 million that's been spent on this campaign and put it into something like, James, you know what I'm going to promote, the non-GMO project, or something like that. The idea that we can do this for ourselves. We do not need the government to step in and do it for us, and we don't need a law. All we need to do is organize in a way that we can spread and share this information instantaneously through the remarkable technology we have at our fingertips. It's already going on. You do not need a law. You do not need to spend tens of millions of dollars lobbying the government to take care of you. You can start doing it for yourselves. And again, it's the type of thing where it's not much to start with, but the more people use it, the more people who engage with it, the more effective it will become. So once again, the power is in our hands, not the government's and not the corporations.
James, interestingly enough, the No on 92 side mentioned just what you did. There's other things out there for people to use. The non-GMO project was one that they explicitly cited. So that's interesting. James, let's transition to our second story. And as the band Franz Ferdinand said a few years ago, who gives a damn about the profits of Tesco? The largest UK supermarket had a 92% drop in their profits as a criminal case opens. James, last week, Britain's biggest retailer revealed that its latest half-year profits slumped by 91.9%. That's from £1.39 billion last year down to £112 million. And now Tesco's facing a criminal investigation over an emerging and developing accounting scandal that saw the company's profits artificially inflated by £263 million. That's $420 million in US dollars. The Serious Fraud Office, SFO, will probe whether supermarket bosses conspired to massage profits and find out if the distortion went on for years. The SFO announced its investigation after it emerged that Tesco's accounting error was even worse than predicted, 263 instead of 250. The SFO, which can prosecute companies and individuals and has the power to send people to jail, has already brought recent cases against our good friends at Barclays and GlaxoSmithKline and even Rolls-Royce. Tesco reeling from the suspension of 8 senior executives over this scandal, and it faces basically the biggest crisis in its 95-year history. So it's looking like Enron Mart, basically kind of a cooked books situation, James, from the very same folks who spend millions and millions of dollars to stop you from wondering what you eat, whether that's GMOs or horse meat, as we documented right here on New World Next Week back in February 2013, as places like Icke and the aforementioned Tesco were selling horse meat and worse. James?
Well, I think that's the real point of this. I don't particularly, and I imagine most people out there don't really care about the accounting practices of the supermarket they're going to, but at the very least it does show the mentality of the people who are running this industrial food system that we're all helpless bystanders in if we are stuck in that routine of just going to the supermarket for all of our food needs. Because again, you don't know what you're eating, you don't know what you're getting, you don't know what they're doing with the money and what's going on behind the scenes, and it's all part and parcel of the corruption that goes on in every stage of this industrial food production process, which is why, once again, it would be best to take things into your own hands as much as possible. Community co-ops, farmers markets, the goat sharing system that we talked about on a previous episode of the Corbett Report with you and your girlfriend there in Oregon. Lots of different ways to at the very least start weaning yourself off of this system. Again, it doesn't have to be 100% all at once, but just a little bit. And if we withdraw ourselves from this supermarket industrial food production system, then who cares about their accounting practices? Let them eat cake.
Absolutely. James, it's funny you even mentioned that. The goat sharing that we did, it stopped actually over a year ago now. We think of it all the time. Cassie and I constantly like, man, I miss milking the goats.
Did you eat the goat?
No. The folks who are running the homestead kind of spread out and went in different places.
Oh.
So I guess we're talking about goats now. Let's wrap up this episode 210 of New World Next Week with some tricks and treats for Halloween. And I think a good way to do that is with a little bit of good news next week notes, as we try and do here on New World Next Week. You can submit stories to us because, as we note, it can't all be doom and gloom. And a lot of these things, we have to celebrate the whole reason we're trying to fight this fight in the first place. James, a really funny one you got to enjoy when these kind of things happen. the Queen decided she's joined Twitter, and it's, if you'd like to tweet at her, at British Monarchy. So the BBC, the Beeb, Auntie Beeb is all excited about it. So they're broadcasting and showing, the Queen has joined Twitter, and here are some of the live updates and tweets. And up comes a reply telling the Queen to F off. So using that bit of live television fun, a couple of other interesting examples of folks speaking out, James. It was interesting once I started to kind of look at it. There have been a lot of examples of this recently. Super Bowl champs, the Seattle Seahawks, their coach, Pete Carroll, openly talks about peace as opposed to war. He did this with an interview with a Seattle Times journalist. And he went into this, it was not about politics at all. And he just went into this passionate talk about basically fear, not love, in a situation where he was talking about Iraq. But that's not actually his first bit of speaking truth. Back in 2013, we actually reported for you here, Seahawks coach peppered a 4-star general with 9/11 conspiracy questions. So there are folks out there, even folks coaching sports ball teams, who do have an open mind to a lot of these issues. And again, I think a lot of that is thanks to folks using the internet as a form of alternative media, James. It's strange that it's almost 1 year to the day, James, that you and I jumped off the Russell bandwagon for Halloween 2013, because he was gaining a lot of interest and folks were cheering and he was speaking the truth. So now he's admitted he is open-minded to 9/11 conspiracy theories. And the moment he did that, BBC Youth radio channel completely freaked out, and as everyone goes into the rabble about 9/11 truth. Frank Serpico, the famous ex-cop played by Pacino in the film Serpico, was just recently quoted saying, essentially, we're in a police state. The police are out of control. And an ex-CBS reporter, Cheryl Atkinson, says media covers for the Obama administration, James. So those are interesting examples. Not necessarily I'm heralding that they're all heroes to me, but it takes guts sometimes for folks to speak out, and I always enjoy it when they do it and they don't apologize for it.
Agreed, 100%. And on that last note, Cheryl Atkinson, people, attentive viewers might know that I referenced one of her articles last week on this program where we were talking about the swine flu cases overestimated. The CBS story that was scuttled in 2009, that was Cheryl Atkinson. So there you go. She's still making the rounds, and I wonder if she's doing alt media interviews. I guess we'll find out. I love that Queen's first tweet post. It's good to know that even the Queen can't avoid the Twitter trolls, and if anyone deserves Twitter trolls, it's the Queen. So that is a good story, and it does show that not everyone buys into the propaganda around the monarchy. And it is also good to hear that, NFL coaches also question the wars and the propaganda, especially because the NFL is clearly used as a propaganda vehicle for the Pentagon. So it's good to know that even people within that system speak out against it and remind even the most fluoride-addled people who only watch NFL and only, care what the NFL people have to say, will remind them that there are other opinions out there on this war state. So it is good to see people standing up and speaking out. And as I tried to point out in a recent episode of my podcast, one of the things the Milgram experiment showed is that if people before you wouldn't go through with the experiment, then you would be less likely to go through with it yourself. So just seeing someone resisting can be an important part of the dominoes of everyone else starting to resist. So my hat's off to everyone who does use whatever platform they have to speak out on issues that matter.
James, if I may, another brief addendum to this episode. We also follow a lot of the submissions from folks, again, on Twitter, hashtag New World Next Week. Some updates to stories that we've been following in recent weeks here, and a lot of these submitted by some of our best folks like GJ Salisbury, Twisted Politics, Brock West, Written Guitars, Daz Alt Theory, some of our good folks on Twitter using hashtag New World Next Week. James, investigators say that the snowplow driver in the Total Oil CEO crash, he was drunk, but he was well known to be a teetotaler. That's AKA straight edge. Saudi Arabia surprises the market with a supply cut announcement, and so oil, of course, jumps. And conveniently enough, James, a new North Sea oil field was found just after that Scottish referendum. It's a crazy coincidence. Meanwhile, MH17 Dutch prosecutors open to theory of other plane shooting down the airliner. And an interesting one to this, James, that goes along with it, and I think it shows there's a lot of high weirdness going on. Scientists identify Amelia Earhart plane fragment today. And I would point to our good friend Lauren Coleman of copycateffect.com, who's tracking a lot of just the strange kind of synchronistic action going on with the names, the numbers, the dates, the places, the twilight language, if you will. And a few quick notes about the ongoing Ebola operation. A Liberian scientist says the U.S. is responsible for the Ebola outbreak in West Africa. Obama says right there on video that this might be a trial run for a deadlier airborne disease. And James will wrap it up with another bit of good news. Guess who dropped an Ebola truth bomb on commercial radio this morning? It was this guy. I now produce a morning radio show here in Portland, and I'm able to bring some of our sort of underground stories to the FM airwaves as I got the story about the defiant Ebola nurse, Casey Hickox. She works for the CDC. So we're tracking that as the Ebola operation rolls onward. James?
Well, speaking of using public platforms to drop truth, awesome. Good for you. You are living up to the Christian Slater model. And also, is teetotaler not an American phrase? You don't say that in America?
It is, but it's...
Maybe it's old-timey.
Yeah.
It's like chimney sweeper. Parliamentarian or something. All right, well, cool. Good stories. Again, tons and tons of links to go through. So again, I hope people do make use of the show notes, because James puts a lot of effort into